Great. Hi. The claim made by my opponent was marijuana, which is harmless compared to K2, would be better off as legal for recreational use as well as medical. She backed this with 3 secondary claims of 1, marijuana being less harmful than K2, 2, legalization of marijuana possibilities, and 3, what should be done with K2. Her first secondary claim was that marijuana is less harmful than K2. Her first point to back that claim up was that marijuana is natural, that it's a plant. But just because something is natural doesn't necessarily deem it safe. In fact, there are many plants that can actually harm humans, such as poison ivy. She then proceeded to talk about the effects of marijuana, such as like dry mouth, short-term memory loss, red eyes, etc., but failed to mention the more serious effects. The National Institute on Drug Abuse says adverse impact on learning and memory persists after the acute effects of the drug wear off. And long-term effects, especially on, and a variety of adverse and long-term effects, especially on cardiopulmonary and mental health. And to truly compare the one drug to the other one, you have to, in depth, have both the short-term effects and the long-term effects. And that was not named for marijuana. But for K2, she talked about how that K2 has about the same side effects as marijuana, but they haven't studied well in depth yet of the long-term effects. But that doesn't make it safer than marijuana necessarily. I mean, less safe than marijuana necessarily, because we have no idea whether it is or not. So that's not very. The point there wasn't very reasonably thought of. And her secondary claim is that marijuana should be legalized. The first point made was that she said there would be decreased crime, but never explicitly said how or provided any sort of statistics, so it is harder to believe that the legalization of a product would cause a legitimate impact on any crime rates. She then proceeded with how people who need it for medical uses could have access. Marijuana is not classified as any type of medicine for specific reasons. The FDA would not allow marijuana as a medicine because the trials have not proven that the benefits outweigh the risks. In order for a substance to be medicine, it has to be able to have a consistent measured amount of all ingredients, which is close to impossible when growing plants, and because it is considered addictive. Marijuana is not a medicine and will not be, therefore it cannot be legalized for medicinal purposes. The third secondary claim is what should be done with K2, and the point she makes is that it should be illegal. Well, according to the National Conference of State Legislators, at least 41 states and Puerto Rico have legislatively banned synthetic cannabinoids, and that others are in the process. So K2 may have been legal not too long ago, but it is already banned in most of the states. So that claim was already made already, and someone had already finished it. She also talked about how it is easier to access and cheaper than the plant alternative. But a 2012 University of Michigan study said that 36.4% of high school seniors said to have used marijuana, while only 11.3% had said they used K2 or spice. This is a good group to think about for price and accessibility because most kids don't have a lot of money to spend on the drugs, and they need it readily accessible. In general, marijuana is clearly the dominating drug in popularity, not K2, so there is no issue of K2 competing with marijuana. And therefore it's not practical in comparing the two for either saying that marijuana should be legal or illegal.
All right, well, I thought you outlined the claims pretty clearly, and internally you signposted them well. I do think that there is some confusion on the argument because, some of the points aren't really claims, and they make comparisons without necessarily making inferences. But I thought you handled that pretty well when you talked about marijuana having some harmful consequences, and those were not being considered by the advocate on the first point, and then you presented what those counter issues are. I thought that was pretty effective. The argument that K2 hasn't been studied, I think you need to... You've got a good argument there. You're just having a hard time expressing it. Basically, the absence of evidence doesn't prove that it's automatically more dangerous. It just means that we don't know much about it. It could be less, it could be the same, it could be more. We just don't have any information. The advocates made a poor inference on that. That's basically what you're saying on that point. On the legalization issue, I think you've got the right argument on the FDA. If it's just medical issues that are being talked about here, I think you could expand it a little bit, showing that, for instance, marijuana has been suggested by a lot of places that it's got medical benefits, but there hasn't been any research that supports that. It's mostly just anecdotal evidence that people believe on that, and mostly, people who are high will believe anything. So I think there might be a good argument to make there. How that's relevant, for instance, to the issue of whether it should be legalized or whether, and a comparison to K2 is not clear whatsoever. I thought that you had an interesting argument on the last point, which talked about whether or not K2 really was more accessible. I like the statistic that you had there from that study that says, look, at price access level here, most people don't really have easy access to K2. Marijuana continues to be the big problem that we're worrying about. And I did like the fact that you had an argument earlier on that says, look, we don't really have to worry about this. It's already illegal. And the places that haven't made it illegal yet, they're going to be making it illegal. So this is a false comparison that's being made here. I think that's the way you want to present that. Like I said, I think you did a pretty good job trying to make an argument out of these issues, despite the fact that there's a little bit of confusion on them. All right, thank you.